So, we are here today for a very special interview that we're excited about, and it couldn't be more timely and important. We're joined by Representative Chris Stearns in the state of Washington, 47th Legislative District Representative. And we became aware of Chris through the New York Times article written by Gabrielle Glazer, whose book we're reading right now. It came out last month, The Brutal Past and Uncertain Future of Native Adoptions. And the reason it's so important is because of the recent Supreme Court ruling on June 15th, 7-2 vote, which upheld that Native, the Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978 was upheld, that Native kids will stay in their tribal communities. I hope I'm saying that correctly. So we want to welcome you. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for
Hi.
being here. Really happy to have you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
And we just kind of will dig in and ask you, tell us your story. It's a big one, and we want to give you the platform to do that.
Have you done a podcast before where you've told your adoption story?
No, I have not.
Well, we're really honored that you chose us. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm honored to be invited. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And we're all sort of fans of Gabrielle bringing us together too. So
Yeah, she's amazing.
She's amazing.
Yeah, very big advocate for adoptees, it turns out.
Mm-hmm. So tell us your story and go from there.
Like birth, where were you born and what were the circumstances?
Right. So I guess I'll start in the run up to my birth, which was quite exciting from what I understand. My mom is Navajo. She's from a little town called Pruitt. There's like a rodeo stand there, and that's kind of it.
And is that in Washington State?
It's in New Mexico.
Okay.
So western New Mexico, about closer to the Arizona border. And so the Navajo reservation is Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. And this is sort of on the southern side. So she was a teenager when she became part of the federal relocation program, which was there were a few things that were implemented in the 1960s and 1950s to, essentially assimilate Native Americans. But there was also like a much darker side, which is to terminate tribes. And there were termination acts that actually eliminated the federal status of a number of tribes. And so the assimilation program was designed to relocate. There was a relocation part of that, and that moved young Native Americans, well, actually Native Americans of all ages, but my mom was a teenager, and she was part of the program. So she was relocated to Los Angeles. So the relocation programs went to like Chicago, to Minneapolis, Denver, Dallas, New York City, and eventually like Seattle and San Francisco.
Can I quickly ask, how were the people chosen? Like, how did they choose her? What were the?
I think it was somewhat self-selective. I mean, there are some old like pictures of flyers or posters that said you'll have an amazing life if you move to Cleveland.
Propaganda.
Those cities.
Yeah.
You'll be part of this great society. And you would go to the local Bureau of Indian Affairs or their agents who came out on the reservations, and essentially you got a one-way bus ticket. There were federal relocation offices once you got to the city, but it kind of wasn't like this, be part of suburbia. It wasn't like moving to Levittown, which I think people might have thought it would be like. No, you got to a rundown part of Los Angeles where the government could afford to have a center, and you weren't getting great jobs. You were struggling to get by. So basically you got relocated to the more poor parts of the city. There's sort of this running joke about if you want to find where Native Americans are in any major city, just look for MLK Boulevard, you'll find them. so my mom got relocated to Los Angeles. She got the bus ticket from New Mexico to LA. And so she moved there in the early 60s. And that's where eventually my dad, who's also Navajo, he visited Los Angeles. And, you know, there I was I was on the way. My dad like relocated himself out of Los Angeles. So my mom, you know, it was just me and her, and I was in the womb still. And so
Did he know she was pregnant?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think everyone knew. I'm positive my dad knew. I think that was sort of the second relocation motivation. But anyway, he went to one of those single mom maternity homes because it was still, you know, the mid 60s. And so I was, you know, she had me in North Hollywood Presbyterian in Los Angeles, and I was given up for adoption on the day I was born. So I was born and then then immediately put in the care of Los Angeles County foster care system. So that's sort of how I spent the first 2 years of my life in the LA County foster care system. So I never got to know my mom, but you know, she was just really young, and I think she was, you know, overwhelmed. I mean, it's not easy being uprooted and you know, not really knowing what you're getting yourself into, and then you find out once you get there, oh wow, this isn't like, you know, we're not hanging out in Santa Monica Pier. No, this is not the LA she went to.
This
I was
isn't what the
thinking how
posters
scary.
promised.
Yeah, I was thinking how scary for her, this whole thing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, and so many Native Americans were relocated to Los Angeles. I think of all the cities, it has the largest Native American population. You know, prior to relocation, I want to say about 95% of Native Americans lived on reservations. You know, today, it's about, I want to say it's about a third of Native Americans live on reservations. It was such a successful, efficient, but you know, also devastating program to assimilate Native Americans into the cities. So I spent the first 2 years of my life in foster care, and then this is sort of the way that it intersects with Gabrielle and the Indian Child Welfare Act, is that my adopted parents, they were from, at the time they were living in New Jersey, and so they were interested in adopting a child, and they were definitely interested in adopting a Native American child, and so they turned to Louise Wise Services, which was, you know, one of the
evil
biggest.
Louise Wise.
Yeah, and they were, you know, not too far away in Manhattan, and that's how I got connected with them.
Why were they specifically interested in adopting a Native child?
No idea. I do not know. You know, the circumstances involving my adoption, you know, they just did not tell me about that. I mean, there were certain things, I guess, that, you know, to them were off limits. And so, you know, they did not talk about any of the things that happened, you know, prior to my adoption. You know, this would be the late 60s, you know, and I think by the time I was 10, it was like the mid 70s. And they were, you know, they were very religious, they were very conservative. And so, you know, you just didn't
are they
question them.
deceased? Are they deceased now? Are they
Yes,
alive?
they both passed away.
So
Yeah.
did they raise you in a religious
Yeah,
manner?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to, you know, what do you call it, Bible studies and Christian camps, and you know, there were, you know, musicians that I could not listen to, and you know, on the other hand, Glenn Campbell was a thumbs up. My parents were a little bit suspicious of John Denver. My mom, I remember watching him on a TV special in, you know, in the 70s, and my mom was like, "Why is he wearing sunglasses? He's hiding his eyes. He must be high." But anyway, you can kind of see how
He probably was, by the way.
yeah, I mean, that was like, okay, that's the basis for how I, I learned music. On the other hand, my dad really loved Herb Alpert, so
Some
the
good.
Taste of Honey album cover was like, what? Holy cow, that's in our house. I hadn't listened to John Denver. Anyway,
Talk about mixed messages.
yeah, well, it was definitely a change, but my parents were also very, very open about me being Navajo. I mean, that they were, there was lots of Navajo in our house by my parents, and we would go, and when I was, getting probably like 10 or 11, we took trips out to Arizona and New Mexico.
Oh,
So there was never any, like, we don't know what you are kind of thing, like hiding it. No, it was like you're Navajo. So that was, I think that was incredibly, good of them. And there was no doubt. I mean, they were amazing parents. We just didn't really see eye to eye on like a lot of stuff.
Did you
And
have siblings?
I did have a younger brother. He's also passed, and he also was adopted through Louise Wise. And he was younger, but yeah, he's no longer with us.
sorry.
Yeah.
Did when you were growing up in New Jersey, how was that for you?
Well, I mean, I think when New Jersey is such a melting. I mean, it's a melting pot of melting pots, and at the same time, I was not aware, other than my younger brother, of any other Native American person, within like 1,000 miles. I had no idea. And so, I mean, number one, I didn't really ever have the sense that I fit in. I was always different. And number two, yeah, there was, everyone was like, oh, wow, look, you're Indian. And, there's a lot of stereotypes. And kids being kids, but it wasn't like always bad. I mean, they hadn't seen like other Native Americans either, so everything was based on, the TV and movies.
Gunsmoke and John
Yeah,
Wayne
have
movies
gun will
and things.
travel. I don't want to date myself too much, but or even like the horrible Cannon episodes where
Oh, yeah, Cannon.
but
Right.
but there was also, I think in the early 70s, such a change in how Westerns started to portray Native Americans, and Dee Brown's book, not novel, his history piece called "Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee." That really changed a lot of people's mindsets. The Italian guy who became Iron Eyes Cody, he's in the commercial crying,
Right.
tears, crying over the pollution. So there wasn't like this, oh wow, you're Native American, you're a bad person. It was more like, what do we make of you? And I think sort of summing up my psyche was, when you're a kid and you're like, jumping off like a cliff, or you're riding your bike off a ramp, with your friends, what do you yell? Well, apparently in New Jersey in the 70s, we all yelled Geronimo. So,
Oh gosh, yes.
I'm a kid yelling
Right.
Geronimo, and I think that kind of sums up my my existence at the time.
Gosh. So was your brother also Navajo, or was he?
No, he was from the Fort Peck tribe, the Assiniboine Sioux.
Did you have a close relationship?
We did and we did. He was just he had I think a harder time fitting in.
Yeah.
So did you fall into those stereotypes of the compliant adoptee and the
that's what I was
rebellious
thinking.
adoptee? And
If you listen to his phone calls to me late at night, yes. I didn't see it that way. I think we both kind of struggled to get along in our own different way. I mean, it just has a profound effect on you. Being,
absolutely.
Removed from your birth mother, much less your birth father, who, even if my mom had kept me in Los Angeles, I'm not sure I would have had a relationship with my birth father, because he was long gone by that point. but yeah, just that whole displacement. I mean, the effect
Yes.
it has on you is
Right.
really difficult.
We talk about that a lot,
Yeah.
as adoptees, and you have
Mhm.
just the extra layer too of being completely removed from your
Yes.
culture and people and
It's
Yeah, I
like,
mean, I'm getting my culture the same way my friends are getting. I got a little bit more because my parents, they did take us out to Arizona, but my parents are essentially, there's this wonderful old white couple, who's very conservative and religious. So, you just transport us all to, Arizona, and we're still tourists. So
right.
I'm like,
yeah,
that's, I feel, yeah, I was a tourist myself, and
a
then you
tourist
come back.
in your own culture. It's not.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It was really, really something.
How did you come to be in Washington, and because you do so many things now that are helping
Mhm.
the cause, like
Yeah.
what's your journey there?
I think, I had always been encouraged to, be my parents were in the medical field. My dad was a surgeon and my mom was an RN. Um, and so they clearly had aspirations for me to be a doctor. I think I adopted those aspirations, but I also came to a rather sudden and abrupt realization that I'm really bad at science. I mean, I struggled in science, so I faked it till till I made it, but then eventually I didn't make it, and so in college I had to not be a chemistry major. That was not going to happen. I ended up being a history major and went to law school. And it was probably 1980. It was 1985. I was between my junior and senior year at college that I made a decision to write a history thesis and focus it on my tribe and the federal formation of like
Mhm.
the tribal council. I mean, we've had councils as Navajos for 35,000 years. So the 1920 kind of formation was pretty new, but it was had a huge impact on them. So I wrote about that, and I did some research, and I think I was still dabbling with the idea of maybe there's a way to get into medical school somehow. And so I got a job that summer working on the Navajo reservation in the town called Ganado at Sage Memorial Hospital. And I was doing, I was like a assistant to the assistant, doing research for diabetes, adult onset diabetes.
Mm.
And but I lived right there in Granada, and so I kind of got, everyone's like, "Holy cow, who's this guy? Why is he wearing these button-up shirts, with like stripes on them and like khaki pants? That makes no sense." So they helped me out, they made sure I got like the Western wear I needed to have, but they also like took me in and did ceremony. I went through ceremonies, and I got to.
That must have been so transforming. Like,
It was incredible. Um, yeah, it changed my entire outlook on life. And so, I still wasn't sure what I was going to do after that. I had a vision of living in Manhattan. My other friends were all going to work at banks there, working on Madison Avenue. And I thought, well, if I go to law school, I'll go there. So I went to law school, not totally knowing what I was going to do, but I thought it would be like a big corporate deal. And I spent the first summer doing that, and I did not like it one bit. And so I had a cousin who was white but amazing guy, and he had worked for a nonprofit legal services company, and they worked with Indian tribes.
oh,
So I remember writing him saying, "Are there any like Native American places I could apply to?" Um, when I was at law school for this is over the summer, and he sent me a list, and I applied to. There weren't many. I mean, this is like in the late '80s, so not many
not
Native
many.
American firms, or really, it seemed like there were like two, and there were a bunch of nonprofits, like the Native American Rights Fund, or my cousin worked at Pine Tree Legal Services in Maine. So that's when I started thinking, okay, maybe this is the direction I want to go. But it was still, I still felt, a little bit displaced, I really wanted to go work at a big firm and wear suspenders and a yellow power tie and Manhattan, maybe DC. And then the other big transformation was when I was during law school. I went to law school in upstate New York, and at the time there was a young guy. Actually, there were two of them, and they were Lumbee from North Carolina, and they got involved in a protest that had to do, I think, with the treatment of Lumbee Indians. And anyway, they were young, and they decided the way to really make their point was to stage an armed, takeover, hostage taking of a radio station. And no one was hurt or anything like that, but they became fugitives, and they fled North Carolina and went up to the Onondaga Reservation in New York, upstate New York. And at least one of them did, and Tim Jacobs was his name. He wasn't arrested as long as he stayed on the Onondaga Reservation. And unfortunately, I think he happened to choose the smallest Indian reservation in New York, and so he got arrested as soon as he left it, because you can't spend like the rest of your life in a small area outside of Syracuse. So he got arrested and was being extradited back to North Carolina. And so there was a trial, and a whole bunch of Native Americans, we went up from Cornell to watch the trial every day. And that really made, that's where I was like, okay, this is what I got to do. I got to work for Native Americans, and also, not like do corporate transactions or banking.
Right.
I got to get involved at, helping
Purpose
at the
driven.
political level.
Yeah.
And that's how I ended up, working in Washington, D.C. for a Native American law firm called Hobbs Strauss. And I started there in the fall of 1989. Back then, there were no tribal casinos. The Indian Gaming Regulatory Act had not been passed. That wasn't. I mean, it had it had just gotten passed, but no one had been able to work out a compact, and that really didn't happen until the mid '90s. So when I started at the firm, I was working for tribal schools, tribal health clinics. And it was amazing. And eventually I went to work on Capitol Hill for the House of Representatives and the Native American Affairs Subcommittee, and that was even more amazing.
I'm sure.
I
mean, what a journey really to have this, like how you came through it and came about a few key people that, and having.
You just have, I mean, we don't really know what's going to happen to us. We make all these plans, but we're never really sure. And then things happen, and they are transformative.
Did you have this sense that you finally felt like you belonged somewhere?
Yeah, I absolutely did. I felt like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I always thought I could do a better job at it. So I was motivated. And I was lucky enough to be surrounded by, incredible people. The people at that firm were just amazing. It still exists, but a lot of the founders are gone. And the people I worked for up on the Hill in Congress were absolutely amazing. I worked for Bill Richardson when I started, and then went to work for George Miller. At the full committee, Natural Resources Committee. And then I went back to work for Bill Richardson when he became Energy Secretary, and I got to work in the Energy Department. That's actually probably how I got to Washington. I came out to Richland, where Hanford is the nuclear weapons site. I'm sure it'll be part of the new Chris Nolan movie on Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
But remember coming out here, and then one of my friends, we took a hiking trip to the North Cascades, and I had planned to move to New Mexico. That's what it was my goal.
I
Because
was
no one in their
wondering,
right
like how,
mind
yeah, I
spends
was
their
wondering how
life.
it wasn't New Mexico.
Yeah, no one in the right mind wants to spend the rest of their life in Washington, D.C. So, me and all the people I knew were kind of like, where do we go from here? And I thought New Mexico. But then I took a hiking trip to the North Cascades, and I'm like, no, scratch that. This is where I want to be. This is just so gorgeous. And eventually, yeah, I had the chance to move out here, and I did. So I'm just so grateful to be in Washington.
And did you work your way up through the local politics there, and then?
Sort of. I mean, I think by the time I left DC, I had. I felt like I had done what I wanted to do, but I also got tired of it. I mean, you get tired of like things become sort of repetitive, or they become difficult. I needed, and also for my own mental health, I needed to reset. So I moved out to Washington. I moved to Seattle, and I didn't get involved in anything political. In fact, I kind of stayed away from it. I had been representing the president of the National Congress of American Indians, so I still did a lot of work with him and his tribe. But I didn't do anything political, and it wasn't until like probably 5 years after that I sort of dipped my toe back in, and got a stint on the Seattle Human Rights Commission, and then got a 6-year gig on the Washington State Gambling Commission. And then I was like, oh, okay. I remember we were living on the Muckleshoot Reservation at the time. And I wasn't thrilled with, like, it's beautiful being there, but the surrounding legislative district, the politics were just not to my liking. And I remember we felt really bad when we moved away from the reservation, which is like right next to the town, the city of Auburn. I mean, it's not like 100 miles from Seattle. It's right here. So we moved like 3 miles away, but it was into a totally different legislative district, and that one was like my politics. It was more Democratic. It's a little bit of a swing district, and I walked over one evening to the local Democrats meeting, and they welcomed me with open arms, and I thought, okay, now I'm back. So this was like probably like 10 years after I'd moved to Washington State, that I was like, oh, okay, here we go. And then that's sort of what opened the door and to local politics. So
jumping back to early years and your adoption and all that, did you know the story of your birth mother? Did your parents know that? Did you feel like a longing for her?
Yeah, I always had a longing for that. I didn't know what it was. I mean, I just knew that I was missing out on something. I had like, bonding issues, imprinting issues, you name it. I had them all. Yeah. And I mean, and I was aware that I did not seem to fit in with my parents, and I didn't know that at the time, but it was like classic, just, that's me. I just assumed, they know that too. And so that made it, I think that made our relationship at the time difficult, because I could not accept that they just loved me. I just kind of thought, well, everyone feels the way I do. So I remember wanting to get out of the house. My brother was like, had the same thing, but like even 10 times more than I did. But he also didn't have a filter. I modified my behavior a lot to please my parents. My brother never modified. He turned up the volume to not please them. and drive them insane. And I remember being jealous of my brother because he became like a heavy metal musician. I mean, I became a lawyer. So there were times, but he also like suffered so much more than I did.
Yeah.
And he had mental health issues. So, there was like this freedom I saw in his ability to, just do what he wanted and not care what my parents thought. I totally cared what they thought. I was obsessive about it. And
Were you, when you were adopted out of foster, so you were 2 when you went to them. How old was he when he went to them?
I think it was about a year and a half.
Okay.
Also Los Angeles, and as I said earlier, also Louise Wise. Yeah. So I do recall going to Newark Airport with my parents to meet him as he flew across the country.
So traumatizing.
It's
for,
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, really, for both of you, just
Yeah.
complete. We're reading up about a lot in Gabrielle's book about the Louise Wise agency. Not the
So-
greatest.
No. Track record.
So I remember the agency. I don't remember any of this. I have like one vague recollection of going to a picnic for Native American adoptees and their parents, or maybe it was vice versa. But either way, we're all up in New York. And it was just, I just remember being so crowded, and there was watermelon, and it turned out I don't like watermelon. I'm one of the few. That's like a very distinct memory. But I mean, the program, the Indian Adoption Project, was so terribly successful that it probably wasn't a surprise that
No.
I found myself with my parents at a picnic with hundreds of other people, in New York City with little Native children running all around.
I saw the 60 Minutes. I was thinking about this morning when Sarah and I were getting ready to come on here, that we're adoptees. We're, pretty educated people. And I didn't know a lot of these things that happened in our own country, right? I was also a history major. And it's like the 60 Minutes with the Canadian adoptions, with the Native American children. It really was so eye-opening to me, and reading all the things that you're involved with and what's gone on. It's just heartbreaking what's happened, and there's no going back, but just the education of it.
I mean, we have to, I think I mean, it's sort of in the sense of like our country, our society, we have to be able to learn from these things. And I feel like, in certain areas where we're like, professional athletes, you got to forget it. We're like, no, don't forget. This is really important. We've been struggling against, assimilation. We've been struggling against the loss of our land, which isn't like the property land in the sense that the most people think of it. It's like our culture is bound to the land. We have to go to certain spots because those have spiritual significance to us, and if we can't go there, they're gone. That affects the way we think and behave, the way we pass on our values to our children. It'd probably be like, okay, here's your Bible, but you know what? You don't have the New Testament. You just make do with the Old Testament. Like what? So taking away the land has profound impacts, and those things that matter to us are really go to the core of our being, our spirituality. So as the Justice Comey wrote, in her opinion, she started off with some of the basic building blocks of what our nation was trying to do when they passed the Indian Child Welfare Act to restore some of the culture and to help protect tribes. I mean, at that point, it was like, what, 30% of Native children had been adopted out. I mean, that's just whole scale,
30%.
Yeah.
It's a shameful.
Shameful.
whole scale destruction of peoples. And, so Congress in 1978 wrote that, the most important thing, the most important resource tribes have are their own children.
Yeah.
And, the testimony of a tribal leader from Mississippi, from the Choctaw tribe down there, before Congress, he said that this tribes are our future. If we don't, children are our future. If we don't have our children, we're going to go away. So, that's really the heart of the Indian Child Welfare Act, and it's done an amazing amount of good for tribes. I don't know what our country would be like. I don't know what tribes would be like without the act.
You were young. Was there any awareness in your family of this act passing in 1978? Were you
No,
aware
there wasn't. I think so. This would have been like 78 during the Carter administration. My parents were very conservative, not fans of Jimmy Carter. They couldn't wait for the imminent arrival of Ronald Reagan, but they weren't, they weren't really like hyper politically active. They just kind of, they knew what they didn't like, and so they weren't really, following any of this stuff. Plus, adoption was not on the table for discussion. Again, we did not talk about that at all. That was a great mystery. A lot of questions about, but never any answers from them.
So they didn't tell you anything about your birth? Like, were you
I'm not
even
sure they
ask?
ever knew how much they knew. They, when I was really young, right after the adoption, LA County, they sent social workers to New Jersey, probably 6 months, 8 months, whatever, after the adoption took effect, to, follow up. So, how much they knew from Louise Wise, how much they knew from their contact with the social workers, their interviews. I have no idea how much they knew because they never told me.
Have you met your birth mother?
No, I have not. I've looked for her for a long time, but I've never been able to find her. So no, I've never met her. She's probably, I think she was 17 when I was born. So she's not much, now I can say she's not much older than me. She's still a young person.
Yeah.
How did you get the story then of her story?
Well, I was dying to know. I've always been wanting to know. And I've had people, back in 1985, when I went to spend the summer there, they were all like, we got to figure out, get you connected so you can do things specific to your clan. That didn't happen. And then when I went to work in DC and working for tribal schools, a number of them were schools on the Navajo reservation. So, our clients would come out to DC and, these wonderful, men and women who in Navajo, and they're like, oh my God, we got to find your parents. And, that's a whole nother generation of people. Couldn't find them. And I thought, well, okay, now it's a few years later, I'm working on the Hill for, Bill Richardson from New Mexico doing Indian issues. But now I'll be able to get nothing. And it eventually I hired an attorney, and they were able to get the sealed records from the state of California, but that was almost year 2000.
And have you done the DNA sites and all of that?
No, I have not.
Oh, you have not.
No, I have not done the DNA sites. No, I got the original birth certificate and the social workers reports through my birth, and then on the first visit to New Jersey. So it ends after that. I assume those are all the records that the state had, but they did not have anything from Louise Wise. So that's still, a great mystery.
Wait, Louise Weiss didn't have anything?
Well, they did, I'm sure, but they weren't part of like what California had.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I only got the court order to access the California records.
you very well could have some siblings out there.
Well,
I
I have
know.
a half sister, the social workers notes, they wrote that, my mom had a daughter, the year before when she was
Oh,
16. And so, and that daughter was named Carmelita, and she was sent back to the reservation by my mom to be raised, on the Navajo reservation
And
by her family.
nobody can find her?
Not yet.
Ah,
And and so I've always been curious, like, yeah, what happened? What was the difference between her going back and being raised on the reservation and
yeah.
being put into being given up for adoption? I have no idea what the difference was. I'm sure it was profound, but I just don't know.
I really
gosh.
hope you are able to find that out someday. Those answers are sometimes feel so important, don't they? To
Yes.
Yeah, because you don't, your sense of identity is so wrapped up in your mom. And
Mhm.
Mhm.
I think at a deep psychological level, it affects your own outlook on life, your own ability to relate to other people, or how you relate to them.
I would go further and say on a cellular level.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would too.
Yeah, I mean, I've been lucky enough and fortunate enough to have been in, recovery for some time. But being in recovery allowed me to identify, a lot of those issues, and
Hmm.
have the tools that I was not necessarily born with, to sort of function and build healthy relationships.
Well, you're in a state of survival from the minute you're born, going into foster care, being moved across the country in a different whole culture. It's just hypervigilance, right? I mean,
Yeah, and I feel like, even though I had such profound differences with my parents, I was able to, really understand them as parents and as people, as human beings, and understand how much they love me. Um, but I wasn't always that way. I
When
mean,
did you go into recovery?
in 2010, so almost, well, what's today, the 8th? So yeah, like
13
13
years.
years ago on
good for
Monday.
you.
Um,
On
I'm
Wednesday.
coming up on 2 years myself.
all right, congratulations.
Yeah, it's life changing.
I mean,
Mhm.
it changes that, it changes your outlook.
Hmm.
I think profoundly it changes your ability to understand, who you are as a person, and that frees you up, because otherwise you're constantly under fire, worried about what other people think of you, and also now
Mhm.
you don't care. But that means now you can think of other people, in the right way.
It
And
is
that's what,
the statistics of adoptees who have substance problems is
Is
astounding.
astounding.
yeah, I can imagine. I mean, we have this thing where we talk about Native Americans in recovery, and the first statistic, people was like, oh my God, the rate of addiction or disorders is so high. And what we say is, yeah, you know what, the rate of recovery is so high. It's incredible. And that's something I'm very proud of. But uh, getting eventually building a relationship with my parents. I feel so lucky, because I'm positive that is not the experience of
Yeah.
so many adoptees, who go through their entire life with such a struggle, and something that's not of their own making. You know, we ask these questions like, why me? Or how did this happen? What is the meaning of this? And
Mhm.
there are no answers, and for so many people.
And
There really aren't. Louise and I were talking yesterday, and I was just thinking how random it was, that I ended up in the adoptive family I did. A different 2 minutes, a birth that was 2 minutes earlier could have been an entirely different family. My birth mother went into labor on a plane out of JFK.
Wow.
Had it been 15 minutes earlier, I could have been through the Louise Wise Agency, any,
Yes.
They
just
were
any
still
number of,
reaching.
We talk about this as the sliding doors of who comes to get you. I had a very positive family I was raised with, but 20 minutes later, like Sarah said, the next day, it could have been a totally different thing. And that's just, you're just at the whim of this. And you don't know, you're always searching, and Sarah and I became friends because of being adopted. We're like, oh, I'm adopted. You have this unspoken language that others don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, the basic truism about we don't get to pick our parents, that's true for everyone. But we have the sense of like, yeah, but someone else could have picked us. And it's like,
right.
yeah, wow, man.
Yeah.
So, did you have children, and do you have children?
Yeah, we have my wife and I, I married her, and she has had 2 daughters. So yeah, I'm now the father of 2. I don't want to say young girls, but they're not young anymore. They're 27 and 30 now.
Aw, young to
But
us.
they're still kids, and still in high school in my mind. So their mom is also Native American. She's a member of the Quinca tribe, and they're enrolled in the Quinca tribe, and so they're very aware of their identity. And
That's good.
one daughter's like, all she does is work on Native American issues. She's an elected member, elected official in her tribe.
It's
So
amazing.
it's incredible to I feel like they're the control and I'm the experiment. But it's amazing to watch
Right.
them just thrive. And
They're the change,
yeah, and I'm fortunate enough to have sort of found my niche, my role on this earth. So I can really appreciate that. And I just it's such an amazing gift. And we have a grandson now, and so it's totally cool. And just really something. But
it helps to make you feel more tethered in the world, I guess, huh?
yeah, it does that, and it also helps you. I think as you look outward, and as you look forward, it helps you understand, well, this thing just doesn't like run on its own. Life doesn't fix itself. Our country doesn't, just have this magical destiny. You got to work at it. And the work starts, where it starts at home, and it starts in your city, it starts in your church, or voice, whatever you're doing, that's where it starts. And so, I have this extra motivation to, I was lucky enough to work for this Native American law firm, and we worked on, we worked on Indian adoption cases. I was lucky enough to meet the people at the Association on American Indian Affairs, and that's their thing. And now I'm lucky enough to be in the legislature, and we not just only work on Indian adoptions, but we're working at trying to strengthen our open adoption laws, on helping people get access to medical records. The work it doesn't end, and that's a good thing in a way.
Yeah, thank you for that work, by the way, because that's what we talk about on this podcast all the time, is not having the access, and people's identities erased, and so many fires and floods,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one thing we don't have in Washington is we don't have court access. So in California, I just assumed this was the case, and I learned it's not.
No.
In California, my attorney petitioned the state court, and they were able to order Los Angeles County to turn over this information. That authority doesn't exist in Washington. So one of the ways we were just discussing the other week was maybe because, the organizations that don't want that information turned over, and then they're very active on, the legislative level. But we were thinking, well, maybe we, maybe the solution might be to have the ability of the court to order that information turned over to a tribe. So, the tribe would then be able to, help that person become enrolled in that tribe, or share that information with medical providers. So, it might not, if I was petitioning for that information, I might not get it, but my tribe would get it. And anyway, there's so much work that can still be done. And, there's so many people are so affected by adoption, because it just, it really creates almost like this unending series of questions.
Yes. Yes. Well, thank you so much for being here and being open with us, and for all the work you're doing. It's so important.
Well, thank you for having me. It's really, it's so wonderful to be able to talk to you guys. And, I mean, we all go through so many things, and, what do they say? Like, grief shared is divided, and joy shared is multiplied.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's a great way to end.
That's beautiful. And tell us if we can ever help you, like on anything you need adoptees for. Sign Sarah and I up.
Oh, I'll be glad to. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.